Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, August 6th, 2026. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, the originator of the Commentary Magazine podcast, now senior editor at National Review, and of course, the author of the very important book, Blood and Progress, which if you are watching on YouTube, you will see behind his left shoulder, Noah Rothman. Noah, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, John.
And you should really be thanking me for having, because it's such a wonderful day. We have so much to be thankful for. We have an Islamist psychotic as the Democratic candidate for Senate in Michigan. We have Donald Trump wandering around looking for somebody to surrender to in the Iran war, and Iran seems to be refusing to allow him to do so unless the terms of his surrender get ever more humiliating for him. And I don't know, the Wisconsin gubernatorial candidate and the Democratic Party, I guess that's next week, is the Wisconsin primary, is so crazy that even Bernie Sanders thinks she's too crazy. That is how crazy Francesca Hong is. It's not even just that she thinks that Thanksgiving is evil and that her own child means that she is in the vicinity of or in relation to whiteness because she's apparently married to a non-Asian white person. So her son is carries some kind of a disease maybe that she needs to be separate from. Okay,
you're not even, I mean, you say crazy like it's kind of a metaphor or a literary device.
Yeah.
I think she's unbalanced. Right. I made a joke yesterday on Twitter. I don't joke on Twitter very often. It's an unrewarding thing to do. But I tried.
What?
And it was like, maybe Francesca's favorite holiday is Thanksgiving because now she's doing damage control, which is exactly where you want to be, doing damage control around your denunciation of the universally beloved holiday. But she's like, it's actually my favorite holiday. So I was like, well, maybe it is. Everything's relative, right? She could just hate all holidays. Ha ha. It's not a joke. My colleague Jim Garrity had a fantastic piece where she's going through Francesca Hong's thoughts on holidays. And she hates them all. She hates July 4th. She doesn't like fireworks. She hates Halloween. She doesn't like the costumes. She's not a fan of Christmas for obvious reasons, although she likes Kwanzaa. And of course, she can't stand Thanksgiving. She is one of these caricatures of a class of people. In the United States, there are probably 400 of them at most, but they're all very literary. They're all in academia, and they've been denouncing holidays. I wrote a whole chapter on it in my last book, Rise of the New Puritans, where they hate every holiday because it just distracts you from the great progressive project, which compels you, by the way, to be miserable at all times and in all hours of the day because somebody somewhere might be experiencing oppression, persecution, what have you. Even if it's all imaginary, these people do exist, but they're infinitesimally small as a constituency, and they all seem to be represented in Francesca Hong's head.
But where does she stand on non-Western holidays?
Well, Kwanzaa, she's a big fan of.
I would think so.
Presumably
Kwanzaa is the ultimate Western holiday. It was invented in New Jersey, so I don't think somehow.
So it's very American in some way.
Okay, so I'm just saying that things are not good right now, and I don't want to just sit here and sort of like luxuriate in the awfulness of the current political moment. So what is it that we can maybe pull out together here as a group therapy session? What is it that we can try to find in this August 6th, 2026 morning, on this morning, that gives us a ray of hope for at least, I mean, it can be short term, it can be long term, What is our ray of hope? Noah, you seem to have
I'll
a ray
give a proposition. I'll give a proposition. It's delusional, but the instinct is right.
Yeah.
I've read at least 2 pieces and multiple tweets from unnamed people in the orbit of Democratic establishmentarians who thinks this whole thing could be sewn up in Michigan if El Sayed denounces Hassan Piker, which is not going to happen. He said as much explicitly, unless he experiences extreme duress over the course of the next few weeks and the polling collapses for him. Not going to happen. But at least you have some Democrats who are willing to entertain the notion that most Americans did not like 9/11.
You know,
that's what I got for you.
I don't want to call that the lowest possible bar in human history, but if that is something that's supposed to make me, cheer up, I could be cheered up 10 times a day, by things like that. It is an interesting aspect of everything we're talking about here that we are 35 or 36 days out from the 25th anniversary of 9/11, and here's something we can talk about that actually dovetails with the cover story that will be in a September issue of Commentary, available late next week online, I think, which is, what if we so convincingly won the war on terror because we have had no major terrorist act on American soil since 9/11. I mean, we've had incidents, the Pulse shooting and all of that, but not a grand assault, sort of the big one of some sort. And as a result, this has cleared the room a generation later for people who don't remember it or had no impact from it because they're under the age of, let's say, 30. And they may dimly remember it from being 4 years old, or they don't remember it at all and they're 24 or younger. And that they now have the luxury of imagining that the world of the Islamic radical is not anything that they need to worry about because the country, in fact, protected them from the threat. We feel like we don't protect them enough, but all that stuff that everybody made fun of, security theater at airports, the TSA, taking off your shoes, I don't care what. Going at them at the source in ISIS, in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, that we effectively did win the war on terror. And our victory is now giving space to people who seem to want to empower people who actually kind of supported what happened on 9/11. Because what happened on 9/11 is science fictional or some past history to them. That's my proposition.
Well, this is the old victim of their own success thing. Right. Years ago, Charles Lane wrote a great column about this, which was basically making the argument that Republicans were losing because they had won the argument over crime, and that meant implementing policies that reduced crime, and that meant that all these things were safer than they would have otherwise been, and people just weren't generally as worried, not just about crime, but they weren't quite as worried about illegal immigrants in their cities, let's say, or they weren't quite as worried about this or that, and so they had been a victim of their own success. So that's what makes it cyclical, because really, you could say the good news is that we could take our eye off the ball now. But the bad news is that when we take our eye off the ball, we're going to have, something in the future to remind us of why, you can't get complacent. So I think it's a cycle in that sense.
Go
ahead.
And I've written about this. I think we're a victim of our own success in the war on terror in more ways than one, in that because we closed down essentially spectacular terrorist attacks as an avenue, the Islamists took to invading politics and advancing their cause in that way.
I mean, right after 9/11, I was a sophomore in college in 9/11, very interested in geopolitics. And when that happened, I took courses that were geared towards addressing it. And that's what read the Islamic Bible, but as a Quran, and was exposed to Sayyidi thought, Edward Said, in this lecture about, why 9/11 happened. Embedded within it was my very Sayedian professor's assumptions that the United States deserved it. But he didn't dwell on OBL's logic, which was the United States kicked out Saddam Hussein in Kuwait and then by invitation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had a presence there. That was OBL's logic, which was crazy. And nobody signed on to that. It was, a grand Orientalist thesis around the West's abuses of the Arab body, et cetera, so forth. But now Osama bin Laden's logic is being accepted in total. Milot Kiros in Colorado all but endorsed it. Edward Said will not denounce it. And it seems like those are the only people who are willing to give voice to this sentiment. But I bet you it has broader purchase.
Not Edward Said. You mean Abdul al-Sayed.
Abdul al-Sayed, sorry.
Yeah.
Edward Said, the academic, Abdul al-Sayed, the Senate candidate.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very true. It's very, and indeed our response, the anti-jihadist response is also to quote, Osama bin Laden in a weird way, which is to say the argument that he said that America, that what's important in the world is to be the stronger horse, and that America had become the weaker horse and was therefore uniquely exposed to being hit by the spectacular attack. The weird, I think, and Abe, your idea that they moved into politics, the thing about that, of course, is that would not have been possible without the infrastructure, the academic infrastructure that was built to educate, marinate people in the acceptability of these views in the American elites, and to educate them in not only ideas of social justice and the virtues, therefore, of socialism and the evils of late capitalism, all of which are part and parcel of what makes the DSA manifesto on the economy so attractive to so many younger people. But also the rise of these departments at colleges across the country of East Asian, Asian studies, South Asian, Middle Eastern studies, Arab studies, all of that. And a great deal of that was exogenous. A great deal of that was being paid for by forces outside of the United States, by Qatar and other rich actors, and these universities were being tempted and successfully tempted into bringing into their folds as students all of these full freight paying kids of the Arab and Islamic elite, who then also populated campuses and spread their ideas around. And we are here 25 years after 9/11, but kind of 22, 23 years into this experiment in Islamic radical institution building inside the United States. And it's been way more successful than anybody would ever have thought that it would.
I agree. I don't like to use the term perfect storm, because I'm tempted to use it in every discussion, because there's so many streams that contribute to our woes at once here, but particularly on this. But you've also got the emboldening of a bunch of NGOs and activist networks, domestically and internationally, that sort of got involved in this, that also receive foreign money. And you've got the online information warfare at the same time, which really sort of seems to have taught one generation of Americans everything that they know about Islamism, which is not much. I mean, when you talk, Noah, about Osama bin Laden's manifesto, recall when was this? Might have been
2
2023.
years ago at most. Yeah.
When there was this viral TikTok moment of a bunch of 22-year-olds saying, "Wow, you got to read Bin Laden's manifesto." Turns
Their
out he
first
was
clue
right.
that was all false is that they read anything.
Right.
Read
Right.
things.
Right.
But
yeah.
that doesn't mean it wasn't an effective campaign.
Yes,
Right.
it was very effective.
I mean, radicals are radicals, right? So the Osama bin Laden's document comes back, and people are like, that's sort of interesting. The same way every 5 years, Ted Kaczynski's manifesto comes back. And Ted Kaczynski's manifesto, the Unabomber's manifesto, is a highly literate example of an argument against capitalism and modernity and the evils and dangers of our technocratic society. So much so that it could very easily be published today in the pages of Jacobin or in some eco-sustainable publication.
Or at Columbia University Press.
Or at American Conservative. I mean, this isn't
Or
just
at the
limited to the.
I mean, the
American left.
thing about the
No, but
Kaczynski
right,
thing is
because
that it very closely mirrors the exact discussion that we're having right now in America with the left, which is, the Unabomber's manifesto, as you say, highly literate. It is actually interesting to read because of what he was, right? I mean, it's not itself some kind of massively profound thing, but it's interesting to read a serial killer, attempting to be a sort of intellectual sitting in the woods and whatever. But what follows from what he says, right? There's like part 1 and part 2. There's like all this stuff you could read. You're reading along for a few pages and you're like, yeah, we are too much about computers and modernity, and I don't know, are we losing the common touch and blah blah blah, and then eventually it gets to blowing people up. And today, that's the direct line that we keep having this conversation. It's like when somebody said, "What did y'all think decolonization meant?" Vibes, papers. October 7th was the announcement of the academic, the fulfillment of the academic movement toward that thing. It wasn't like there wasn't an abstract academic movement about decolonialism, and then there was this thing that happened that was somehow connected to it. There was a movement, an academic movement toward October 7th. And that's really why Ted Kaczynski is so relevant now, because now we're skipping this middle part where people pretend that it's not about violence. And you get to this, and again, go back to Ro Khanna on the Drop Site podcast, right? They were saying, as Abe said in his newsletter that day, if you believe what Ro Khanna believes about what Israel is doing and what's supposedly happening to the Palestinians in Gaza, why wouldn't you support, a sneak attack on an IDF base 3 miles from Gaza or whatever? And then from there, maybe a few miles inward. And then from there, it doesn't have to really be an IDF base, does it? Because there's universal conscription in Israel. So when you think about it, everybody goes to the army. This is the snowball rolling downhill.
So here's what I wonder, to your point, Seth, and to John's about this, how this all gets kind of muddled in this undifferentiated radicalism in the radical mind. We reviewed The Revolutionists, this Jason Burke book, for commentary, and he details in the 20th century how the radicals who were sort of committed a little bit to Marxist-Leninist, but not really just, 100%, because they eventually evolved into pan-Arab nationalists and straight-up Islamists, with the Red-Green Alliance, that they were attracted to radicalism, anti-Western radicalism and violence more than they were strict Marxist-Leninism as interpreted by the Cuban revolutionaries. So you have this, say El Said's a true believer, right? He's definitely agreeing. But the broader audience for this, maybe they just see it as generally anti-Westernism, because the DSA's platform is explicitly anti-Enlightenment. It wants to do away with the separation of powers. And that is functionally what it advocates when it says do away with the Supreme Court, do away with the Senate, make the presidency a head honcho. There was this video where they talked about, we'll just call it a head honcho. I would submit general secretary. What they were after is some sort of new conception of the American, of the Western ideal that endorses the West's critics of it, which is why I have written what I wrote about the Michigan race, that it's no longer about politics. It's no longer about tax rates or health insurance or the enforcement of federal immigration law. It is a referendum, a straight up referendum, up or down, about whether the West's critics are right, about whether the American experiment is flawed, irredeemably so, and that the Enlightenment ideals that are enshrined in our founding documents need to be done away with so that we can realize a more communitarian conception of the human condition, a much more social justice fueled idea of what the optimal theory of social organization is, which is incompatible with our present system.
I think you've hit on an extremely important question about what's going to go on for the next 3 months until November 3rd, when the election happens. How broad is the Michigan Senate campaign going to be? Is it going to touch on explicitly what you're talking about here, Noah, which is that this is no joke. This is all the marbles. This is the entry of explicit anti-Americanism into American politics at the highest level that it has ever been. This is not, some Zoom school board lunacy in California with people ranting and raving and then people coming to the mic and being arrested and all of that. This is the Senate of the United States. And Republicans are going to be tempted in two directions in making their case against Abdul el-Sayed. One will be to go hard at how he is a radical. And I'm worried that approach, I hate to put it this way because it sounds like pompous, but will be too vulgar. That is, he's a communist, he's a communist, he's a communist. We're already seeing the use of the word communist and the use of the word communist, right? And I guess people really hate communism, and you can't say, it used to be that they hated socialism, so you could call somebody a socialist, but now socialism is in better odor, so they've now shifted to communist. He is not a communist. First of all, he's not even DSA. He is not a communist. He is a jihadist. He is a left-wing jihadist. He is a radical jihadist. That's a more controversial thing to attack because then you're accused of Islamophobia. But the real thing to do is to go to the people of Michigan and say, do you want this guy who will not say that an effort to commit a terrorist assault on preschoolers at a synagogue in the state of which he wants to be a senator, he is not able to say that was wrong.
Well, he is, but he says it's a function of Israeli violence. In his mind, right, it's justified by virtue of Israel's campaigns against Hamas and Hezbollah.
Okay, so I'm worried that they're going to go at this in the wrong way. And on the other hand, then there's the other way that they could go, which is he wants to talk about Israel. He wants to talk about this. He wants to talk about that. I'm going to talk about jobs. I'm going to talk about our, America's critical position in the world, the need to replenish our military stocks, the things that Mike Rogers actually knows as a former congressman, FBI agent, veteran of the U.S. military, a person who I think was on the Armed Services Committee in the House. And so he knows his stuff. Does he go, he's airy-fairy, pie in the sky, blah, 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 and I'm here on the ground in real, to be a representative of the people of Michigan, which I think is probably the right way to run, in the sense that it's like he's crazy and I'm not. So all the Republicans are going to vote for me anyway, and we just need some independents to cross over for us to get to cross the finish line. And so running a less ideological campaign against him might be wiser, or not, because maybe the fight is too important, and that it's important that it be fought on the basis of who el-Sayed is and why he poses such a particular danger. And I don't know, because if the
you can do that danger without calling him a communist. I think that your instincts were right about, communist being too vulgar. But I think that, Mike Rogers has already started workshopping lines like, Abdul al-Sayed cares about Palestine, I care about Michigan, and stuff like that. It's a version of, obviously it's not nearly as clever for reasons, but it sounds a bit like the, I'm for you, she's for they them type of formulation. And the thing about el-Sayed is that he very brilliantly turned this on its head against Haley Stevens, right? He said she cares about Israel, she's for Israel. There were trucks the day of the election going around Detroit that had giant signs on them that said Stevens equals Israel's future, el-Sayed equals Michigan's future, right? That was the thing. But he was the one talking constantly about Israel. Haley Stevens never brought it up. She never brought up Israel, and she very rarely brought up anti-Semitism, usually only in response to something he had said. Like by the end, she was saying, you need to stop scapegoating Jews because it's ridiculous. But she never brought it up. She never talked about the conflict. She was like, I'm going to diners, I'm going to factories, I'm going to churches, I'm going to community centers. I'm with the people. And he's a podcaster with a national campaign. And despite that, el-Sayed, you have to give it to him, he was able to brand the race in some way as she being, a sort of cat's paw of a foreign power or whatever. He was able to, just by repeating it over and over again, to make people think it was true. And I think you have to start against him. And Mike Rogers, you have to start by turning that on him. You have to, you cannot let him begin to establish a narrative of the race, because when he does that, he has this echo chamber. And he has this, this sort of natural propaganda echo chamber that is going to make it louder than whatever you say. So I think that's a good start, that Rogers has to start by flipping that around and being like, all this guy talks about is Gaza and Palestine and whatever, and we've got all this work to do in Michigan. And that is not disconnected from talking about the stakes and who el-Sayed really is, because once you bring that around, when you say, let's say you take these two candidates, Haley Stevens and Abdul el-Sayed, and you say this guy's for, on this side of a foreign conflict and she's on this side of a foreign conflict. Well, her side technically was Israel, America's ally, right? His side is Hamas. I'm not saying he's Hamas. I'm saying if you frame, I mean, right. But if you remind people, what's on the other side of Israel? He says she cares about Israel. What's Israel facing? What is he running interference for? It's Hamas. And I think that is a way that you can connect.
Why can't you do both? I don't know why they're mutually exclusive. Maybe the communist jihadist talk is too hot for the candidate, but typically you outsource those attacks to surrogates. They do the hot stuff, you do the cool stuff. And while they're saying he's a communist, he's not focused on your issues. He's saying, these are the issues I'm focused on, which are your issues as well.
But
fair enough.
Can I say something? There's another risk in this, in that we've seen it on both sides. We saw it with Trump's opponents. We continue to see it with Trump's opponents. When you make the entire race and the entire issue about the dangerous threat posed by the other person, it actually has a weird kind of diminishing returns effect. Instead of you defining who you are, the other person gains notoriety, which turns out not, even if it's bad, it turns out not to necessarily hurt them. They become the topic, and all you are known as is sort of part of the attack on the main event. The other person becomes the main event. So you've got to be really careful about sort of elevating the other person's dangers as the number one problem. It's not fair, even if that is the real problem. But you see this all the time. I mean, Democrats talking about nothing but the threat against Trump, the threat against Trump, the threat against Trump. It's very tune-outable at a certain point.
Look, I think all of these are very, very fair points, and I don't think that running against El Sayed by saying he is, he's too dangerous to be in the Senate. Then it's like, oh, so to whom does he pose a threat? To corporations, that are monopolizing, or to energy company, whatever. He poses the threat. He poses the threat to the establishment. And so if you want an anti-establishment candidate and not somebody from the swamp like Mike Rogers, you can vote for Abdul El Sayed. So it is, I think, a problem, a danger, to give him that kind of space to say they're scared of me, and they should be, because it's their system that has led to the current terrible conditions that 70% of you think means that America's on the wrong track. I think that watching him over the last 5 days, both before the election and after, he is a larger target of opportunity. We can acknowledge that he is a serious political talent. He climbed this greasy pole. He managed to, sort of worm his way between these two more plausible candidates for Senate, McMorrow and Stevens. He leveraged various things that together that individually would not have been sufficient to get him to where he got, but leverage them. So he's good. He's good. He's strong. There is something very, very unattractive about him. Now, granted, there's something very unattractive about Trump, and he nonetheless won. It's a national election. It's a different set of circumstances, very binary, right? There's something about the guy. He took a victory lap before he won. He acted as though he was already in a position to start talking about how he was going to dictate the future of the Democratic Party before anyone had even cast a vote for him yet. And he kind of took a victory.
I came across this quote. I don't even interrupt you, but to illustrate this quote, which was from May in Time Magazine, an interview with Time Magazine, quote, "Democrats really should be afraid of what I mean for their system of politics. When I say I'm coming for it, I'm coming for all of it." Which is part of the reason why you had Michigan Democrats, including Hillary Schloten, coming out and saying this guy is introducing anti-American sentiment. We can't stand with him, which is extraordinary in an age of hyper-partisanship like ours.
Problem with the term anti-Americanism is now that there are various kinds of anti-Americanisms, right? And we brought up the American Conservative could publish the Unabomber today very, very easily and very readily. There's the right-wing anti-Americanism that says that what we do abroad is dangerous, which is a pretty complementary thing to what leftists think about American foreign policy, or useless or self-destructive or something like that. And here at home, we are just awash in immorality and evil, porn, trans. It used to be that the claim would have been that this abortion was the number one cap, but of course, Roe v. Wade was overturned, so that's no longer quite as effective. But they hate America in one way. Tucker and his people hate America in another way. And then we have the anti-Americanism of the DSA, which is we will like America when it no longer has these institutions that get in the way of a kind of fiat effort to level American society and level incomes and level corporations and level everything. And classically, as Noah indicated, that is all done not by having a system of checks and balances that makes legislation hard to pass and makes change very slow. It is that you have a strong man at the top who waves his hand and wipes away and waves away things and destroys things. That's why it's an interesting thing to see what El Sayed himself said about capitalism. Remember, one of his shticklach, as we say, is that he says he's not a socialist, he's a capitalist. But here is how he describes his capitalism. He said, he asked in May also, why haven't you joined the Democratic Socialists? He says, too much of a scientist, I guess. I'm a capitalist who reads about capitalism. And when you read about capitalism, it's very clear, even to the originators who coined the idea, that the biggest risk to capitalism was not going to be government regulation as much as the corporatists want you to think it is. It was always going to be monopoly. And we know that hypercapitalism tends toward monopoly. We also understand that happens in part because when a corporation gets big enough, it has enough power to start rent-seeking, which is a fancy way of saying influencing government action to protect its own interest. And that's the place we are right now.
That's a contradiction. The sentence contradicts itself.
Yeah, explain why.
Because capitalism does not proceed towards monopoly. Capitalism proceeds towards competition, and you have to appeal to the public sector to intervene in order to raise barriers to entry into your field, to artificially make it harder for competition to enter into the system.
You're right. Rent seeking is how you deal with capitalism's inherent nature, which is that you rent seek by trying to get rules written that interfere with the free flow of a capitalist economy.
Not just that, but when you introduce rules that seem self-limiting, that are really about limiting competition, that's the other thing, right? Like the stuff that these guys like to do, and they like to the regulations that they like to do to keep capitalism in check, is they themselves raise barriers to entry, right? If you say you, like when we had the whole trans fats thing, an Oreos, Hydrox, whoever the owner of Oreos was at the time, was like, this is great. Because they had the R&D money to create a cookie that tasted the same way without trans fat. They'll use a different kind of fat or whatever. They were like the Bell Labs of cookies. They got Nobel Prize winning labs that are like, a chemist's dream. Who couldn't do that? Literally everyone else. Nobody had the money to like tear up their cookie recipe and remake their entire product line. And it's the same thing with it. You could say that with them. I'm just using the cookies as an example. You could use that literally with anything. You introduce these regulations, and whenever you see these companies who like the regulations, like Facebook when Facebook signs on to anything that seems to limit social media, you better read the fine print. Because most likely it's the sort of thing that will pull up the ladder behind Facebook. I'm not trying to make them or Oreos or anybody evil. I'm just saying the guy at the top, he's the one who is most threatened by the free market. And the regulations that you come in to say to keep the market in check and protect the consumer, they end up not protecting the consumer. They end up doing the opposite because they end up pulling the ladder up behind this one company. And that, my friends, is how you get to effective monopolies, or at least one way to get to effective monopolies.
Right. So he wants to call himself a capitalist when he is, in fact, an anti-capitalist. Even his description of it, which is the people who came up with the idea of capitalism. Capitalism is not an idea. It's not an ideology. Capitalism is an explanation of human interaction in the economic sphere.
It's like saying Isaac Newton invented gravity.
Right. I mean, it is an effort to illuminate what happens when people come together to buy and sell goods, and then whatever flows from that. Adam Smith was not a philosopher. He was a philosopher, but he was not creating a philosophical system. He was attempting to describe an almost scientific process of human interaction. What these guys think is that either capitalism is evil or, capitalism, fantastic. Let's use the same tools that capitalists use to create socialist outcomes. Now, why am I bringing this? He is a very target-rich opportunity, in part because of unattractive personal qualities. That's why I brought up the 5 days of, taking victory laps, saying extremely insulting things about Haley Stevens's intelligence, and then after he wins, sort of getting this unity coalition to endorse him, the day after he went, and acting as though this is just his, it's his right, and they're kowtowing to him is his right. And I think that it matters what people are like, and sometimes if you're a Trump, you say it takes a tough man to make a tender chicken. I'm a brute because the system is brutal, and I know how to be a brute for you, and how to be corrupt for you. Essentially, having had to do this myself to get to be to make money and become famous and all of that. But Abdul Sayed doesn't have any such thing to offer his voters or his potential voters. He's going to be one of 100 senators. Now he can say, I'm going to change America, change the Democratic Party, put Fetterman's head on a spike, destroy Chuck Schumer, change everything, and therefore he's a dangerous type. But there's his self-congratulatory and megalomaniacal qualities are not, I think, going to serve him well. He's going to stumble into thickets of his own devising. And just because Haley Stevens was too chicken, because she was too afraid of the Michigan radical Democratic electorate to exploit his weaknesses, she thought she would just stay quiet so they wouldn't get mad at her and she could kind of sneak in. And I guess she almost did. But Mike Rogers is going to have absolutely no such compunction, nor will the outside groups that are going to spend tens of millions of dollars to try to defeat El Sayed. So I think he's a weaker candidate than people seem to think, but not for the reason that, the electorate is more moderate. It's more that he's obnoxious. He spikes footballs before it's time to spike them. And people like that, fate is not often kind to them.
That's why I don't think you can abandon. I mean, you got to be clever with it, and probably the surrogate strategy is best. But I don't think you can beg off the whole red-green alliance thing to which he's beholden, because he is a true believer, and he will, when pushed, defend his views. Benji Sarlin over at Semaphore had a smart observation. I think it was 2016, maybe not the 2020 cycle. I think it was 2016 when Bernie Sanders ran, and he was doing quite well. And it was getting close to the point where the party had to make or break. And the whole process was derailed for Bernie because he went on this incredible digression and continued to do so when he was pressed about Cuban social programs and Cuban health programs. And he just could not stop defending the Cuban communist model, which freaked out the Democratic establishment. And, that was the end of that story. So here, it's prod him a little bit with the whole Hamas thing. Give him a little push on whether or not, October 7th had some justification behind it. Or maybe, the Beirut barracks bombing. You can see the justification for that if you really look hard at it. Why give him that kind of space? I mean, just make him defend his own views until he says, I ordered the code red.
See, I think that is a better thing to go at than the communism thing. That's what I'm saying. What he is a jihadist. That's what he is. He is a jihadist. He is a or jihadist adjacent, or a jihadist fellow traveler, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe he is not himself the setter of bombs or the person who whatever, but he is intellectually a jihadist, and that is the thing to go to the people of Michigan who are otherwise undecided on this and say, here's what we're talking about here. We're not just talking about synagogues. We're talking about the Pulse nightclub. We're talking about the San Bernardino Christmas party. We're talking about any number of the Fort McNair. Was it not Fort McNair?
It was Fort Hood.
Fort Hood. We're talking about people in this country who live in this country who are homegrown, going at killing people, and creating an atmosphere and a culture of violence. And he is sympathetic to them. are you sympathetic to them? Because Mike Rogers, am not sympathetic to them. I want them to be arrested before they do anything bad. And I want them to, if they do something bad, I want them to rot in jail or get the death penalty, because this is America, and this is not a place where we should have any truck with any of this kind of political violence. So yeah, I think even politically going at that is important. Except now we get back to where I started, which is it too late? Did a quarter century of fighting the war on terror successfully domestically mean that making it clear that he lines up with the terrorists is less potent than it would have been? Certainly. I mean, we know it was less potent than it would have been 5, 10, 15 years ago, because nobody like him would ever have gotten anywhere near the 20% in a primary vote, particularly in a state like Michigan.
Here's one of the challenges for that, and why I don't think the victims of their own success thing can go on for too long, because the red-green alliance that we often talk about, Islamists and the far left, they are, I mean, Noah reviewed a book about this, as he said earlier, but one of the things that I've been commenting on since October 7th is just how the PFLP and groups like it are everywhere. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine,
which is a group it's the most left wing of the Palestinian irredentist destroy Israel group, the most terrorist.
It's fundamentally a Marxist-Leninist organization.
Right.
And so what you have is the problem, the threat is worse than it looks, which is going to wake people up. In other words, the threat is not that there's a convenient alliance of far leftists and Islamists who are nothing alike. The threat is that there is an alliance forming of people who are very much alike and have more common ground than people seem to realize. One of the reasons the PFLP is everywhere, especially on campus, is because it is that Marxist-Leninists, Palestinian nationalist group. It does not force American leftists at university to defend a lot of the things that they don't like having to defend. It doesn't come off as trying to create, an Islamist super state, or it doesn't walk around saying, here's why you need Sharia law. It walks around saying, here's who needs to own, the own and operate the methods of production and whatever. And here's who needs to, here's the role that class plays in this conflict, and on and on. They speak their language not because they are adapting to what Columbia University kids say these days, but because Columbia University kids are saying what the PFLP has said for 60 years, right? This is a key thing here, which is that there was an existing and powerful and fairly permanent, obviously, as they're still here, Marxist-Leninist Palestinian national movement and a sector of that movement. And because of the way that the movement is today, they are not at war with Hamas the way they would have been 40 or 50 or 60 years ago. Once upon a time, these groups fought for control of Palestinian nationalism. What happened after October 7th? The PFLP puts out a statement that says, we are with them. We are part of this. Anybody who's part of the PFLP is part of this struggle. And, we are one. We, Hamas, whatever, are one. The PFLP took hostages. They participated in this. So, we no longer have the fight within the Palestinian movement between the branches that you used to have. And so that has leaked into the pro-Palestinian movement in the West, which is now much more comfortable with it, no matter where they stand on economic or cultural issues.
You reminded me of another legacy of 9/11 that I was privy to when I was in, that college course, that the left doesn't really believe that Islamism, radical Islamism, and leftism are compatible. It's not that they're not familiar, and they're not. They're not familiar with the Soviet origins of the PLO or the Soviet origins of Palestinian nationalism. They don't think that Islamist radicalism is anything other than a conservative project. Conservative, as those in the Middle East would understand it, traditionalist, anti-Western, not internationalist, much more culturally insular. That they see that as conservative.
The New York Times calls groups like this ultra conservative.
Yeah.
If you read the New York Times, that's exactly right.
You know, in 1939, Winston Hugh Auden wrote his most famous and most notorious poem at the same time, September 1st, 1939, about the outbreak of World War One, then World War II, and it was a poem that he disowned later because ideologically he found it noxious once he thought through its implications, which is that he essentially blamed the war on the Treaty of Versailles. This is a long-standing idea that the Allies were too harsh on Germany and the reparations punishments were too severe. It threw Germany into this economic turmoil for 10 years that turned out to be fertile ground for Hitler to rise up from and seek to national vengeance and to take over the world because of what had been done to it. And he wrote this line, which is, there is this thing that all schoolboys learn: those to whom evil is done do evil in return. This is, in essence, the philosophy of people who are apologists for Islamic terror against Israel, against American forces in the Middle East, supporting Iran, like people like Max Blumenthal and others who are actually
hurt
openly...
hurt people.
Hurt people was Abdul el-Sayed's version of those to whom evil is done do evil in return. And if you think about it, why Auden disowned this line of his, this most famous thing he ever wrote, it's because it's evil. To excuse evil on the grounds that the evil is blowback, it exists in response to evil doing, that's the real culprit here, is to say that the West deserved the attacks from Nazi, that Poland deserved to be taken over by Nazi Germany, that the bombing of London was okay because look at what they had done to Germany in the Treaty of Versailles. And here we are, 25 years after the War on Terror, when it was understood that America had been hit in this, unbelievable way, sitting there quietly on a beautiful day with absolutely no idea what was going to happen to it. And what exactly was it that we had done in the previous, 10, 15 years to deserve Osama bin Laden's attack? We had defended one Muslim country from the depredations of another Muslim country. We had defended Kuwait against Iraq. We had committed blood and treasure to securing the sovereignty of an Arab nation against the imperial ambitions of another Arab nation. And that was humiliating. That the idea that Arab nations, including Saudi Arabia, would welcome the intervention of an infidel power to help settle and arrange things properly in the Middle East was a bridge too far, and therefore it was time to hit back. Was that an evil? Did we go into Kuwait for evil reasons? We went into Kuwait because a neighboring country had swallowed up Kuwait, and we were the guarantors of the international order. And if such a thing is allowed, then other countries will feel free to swallow up other countries elsewhere, not just in the oil-rich Middle East. They want us to think that what they believe is that America deserves what it gets because of its depredations in the world. But in fact, what they really believe is that a strong America is a humiliation for the countries and the worldview and all of that they believe, though I think falsely. They think they want to prevail and win and hold us back. I doubt that Abdul el-Sayed would want to live in a world dominated by Islamic fundamentalism, by the way. He is, after all, a Rhodes Scholar and a doctor and married to a doctor and makes $700,000 a year and, was a high school like he doesn't want to live in Riyadh. He doesn't want to live in Ramallah. But he thinks that
like Rashida Tlaib, he was born here.
Right.
He's not an immigrant. Like,
no,
she often talks about, and it's like, Rabah Douaji, the first lady of New York City, right? Zoran Mamdani's wife.
Yeah.
She puts, like, in her bios, in her social media bios, that she's from Damascus, but she's actually born in Texas. Yeah. So, like, there is this cosplaying element to all of this. But yeah, all these people were born here. And much as they like to pretend otherwise, they have not chosen to leave their country of birth, the United States of America, for Egypt or Syria or the West Bank or Gaza.
It is in the early 60s, when Black power and Black nationalism arose, there was a crew of African American intellectuals who picked up stakes from the United States and moved to Ghana under the rule of was it Julius Nyerere? I can't remember. Nkrumah, because that was the future. That was a sort of socialist paradise, Afrocentric country, and Maya Angelou lived there, and a whole bunch of people lived there. Malcolm X describes going to Ghana on his trip to Africa in the autobiography of Malcolm X and meeting all these people. And as true of all revolutionary tourism, including Lee Harvey Oswald's, for all we know, but I mean revolutionary tourism in the 20th century, where people do and try to go live in Cuba or in the Soviet Union or in North Vietnam or whatever, the 95% of them, if they can, get the hell out of there and come home, because in fact this is a delusion. They think that what they're going to do is live like they live in Detroit, only in, Ramallah. And guess what? You don't get to be free in Ramallah. You are living under a satrapy and a dictatorship in Ramallah. And
also, you can have, like, as long as you travel, a lot of the poverty tourists, as we used to call them during the Cold War, especially, who are like, I'm going to go to East Berlin. I really want to be in East Berlin. When if you're traveling with an American passport or an EU passport, you can't actually blend in, because in the end you have this kind of shield around you. Like, that's the other thing. Like, if you were Ahmed Douaji were born in Texas, that doesn't go away just because you want to go see how the other half lives or whatever. But you will be the first person lined up outside the U.S. Embassy at 6 a.m. On the day that something happens.
What was the most important thing you said there, Seth? Invoking Jacob Riis. How the other half lives. This is a rich person thing. I was having dinner with my wife the other night in a fancy inn in Western New Jersey. There's money floating around. And I overhear this conversation at the bar among these people who are like, yeah, he's going to give up his American passport and get a Bahamian passport. Why? Because you can go to places like Russia and Cuba. And I'm overhearing this conversation. I'm like, why? Why would you want to do that? The only reason you'd want to do that is because you're curious and you have money to burn. Working class people don't want to go to Cuba or Russia. They know they're going to get conscripted. They know they're going to Magnitogorsk. They understand how this works. The rich people don't. They think they can buy their way out of trouble.
Well, they understand.
They're often right. That's the thing.
But I mean, they understand implicitly. But I mean, this is the point, which is that everybody in America thinks that if they got in a time, if they went anywhere else or lived anywhere else or lived under different circumstances in countries that they believed to be morally superior or something like that, that they would still get to be Americans. They would still have freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. They would be able to, not have 90% of their money taken by the government, all of that. They just think that they can sort of extricate, go somewhere. Just like the NatCons or the sort of, the paleocons who believed that the Enlightenment was a mistake as they take the medications that were made possible by the revolution in science created by the Enlightenment, as they type on their computers, which would not have existed without the economic growth that was caused as a result beginning in 1800 by the Enlightenment. Everything that they are, everything that they believe, everything that they're marinated in, what is a result of the Enlightenment. And they're now against the Enlightenment because they don't actually think that they would ever have to live under the conditions of the world in which the Enlightenment didn't happen or were somehow reversed. When their children would die of scarlet fever, or, they might, a Catholic person in the wrong place in France would be murdered by a Huguenot. That's what
or just be dragooned into serfdom. That is just the natural human condition in the Hobbesian world in which might makes right.
Right. So all of this is a ludicrous fantasy, but that it's a ludicrous fantasy, as Noah details in his book, and as Zaid Ayers Dorn details in his memoir of his two Weather Underground parents. They live in fantasy, but what their fantasy is also of murder, is of destruction. They're not just talking about building a better world or a nicer or a better place. The real passion there is killing the pigs, blowing up their buildings, taking them down. Look at the rhetoric of all the people who work for Zoran Mamdani that people dig up every day from their things they've written or tweets that they've done and all of that, or Francesca Hong or something like that. It's all bloody, violent fantasy.
By the way,
about destruction.
It's also overwhelmingly the only phase of the process they ever get to. Like, they never end up building these paradises, these paradises anywhere. They go, but they spend their days in the destruction phase, in the disruption phase, in the bloody phase. That's it. That happens over and over and over again. That's the fun. That's the fight. Who wants
to bring you back to the war on terror
how to
stuff,
build
right?
a state,
And that brings you back to the war on terror stuff, right? The people save them from the consequences of their own actions. The terrorists didn't win, and so they can keep doing this stuff.
Right. Exactly.
Because they think that in the end, America still, the wealth and the comfort of America will always be there because someone will always, save you. They don't pay attention to what happens after, victory or whatever. Unless you were an ISIS bride, some Americans did go. We did have some. We had the Taliban, the American Taliban.
But you can count
those guys should come back and talk to the people who work on Zoran Mamdani's.
But
campaign.
we can count those people on two hands, fortunately. But
Yes.
Here's the ultimate question, and then we should go, which is, this primary took place in Michigan. 1.5 million people voted. Right? It was pretty much a tie. I mean, so he got 15,000 more votes than she did. So he got 760,000, she got 750,000 or something like that. He wins, she loses. You have that 750,000 that did not vote for him, combined with the independents in Michigan, combined with the Republicans. And my question is, are the American people still to be trusted as a body of commonsensical, no BS, we just want politicians that we can trust to do what we need them to do? Or has the educational collapse of the last two generations and everything, sunk its roots so deep they don't just affect, the elites at elite colleges, but that enough people in the world of the less politically committed would tend to be seduced by some of El Sayed's talk. Whereas, again, 10, 15 years ago, if you were Barack Obama, you wanted to make sure that those people did not think that you were anything like Jeremiah Wright, that you were in any way, shape, or form radically disposed. Your temperament, your mien, your disposition said, I am a calm, moderate person and a grown-up, and I don't lose my temper, and I'm not hostile, and you can vote for me. I am a positive force that will bring positive energy to change in the United States. I don't think El Sayed and the DSA has that, and so the DSA has been very successful in places where they're 80%, 70% Democratic turnout. That's not Michigan. So do we think that the good people of Michigan who are going to decide this election are filled with classic old American common sense, or are they just uniquely susceptible to social media crap?
I just to frame it slightly differently, I think voters want to be sold a compelling vision, and the only people selling them a compelling vision are the radicals right now. On the other side, it's just people saying, look, there's a radical. Look, there's a communist. Look, and you've got to say something unique, be a bit of a showman in one way or another. I mean, this is the story of Trump. This is the story of Mamdani. And to some extent, it's the story of El Sayed. Sell them a different, compelling vision. It can be a good, even Joe Biden, in 2020 said, I'm going to bring you back to a normal world. He wasn't selling himself so much as that idea. I think if you can sell them, it doesn't have to be a destructive vision. It doesn't have to be an anti-American vision. So in that sense, I think, there is an opportunity to counter this stuff. It's still in among the populace.
I mean, I agree with all of that, and it's really depressing the degree to which you used sell and showman, which is true. It was all true, but
totally,
there's a degree to which everybody takes America for granted. As you said, they're like the parents that are paying your rent. It's just a backstop. It's always going to be there. And that's not necessarily true. As back to the 9/11 thing, it's been so long since we've been forced to confront a competing vision of civilizational organization. The Soviet Union represented one. It's gone. ISIS, I think, represented the only true challenge to the Western theory of social organization that we've seen in our lifetimes, in my lifetime since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that was soundly defeated. So they don't really have a competing model and think that this one is just, it has triumphed. It's the end of history, to really borrow the horrible attacks on that book, Fukuyama's book. But nevertheless, they think that this is just the apex of civilizational evolution, and it's not going to change except around the margins. And that's what they want. They want dramatic change at the margins, and are willing to say that they want a much broader revolutionary kind of change. At least they're willing to tell pollsters that, when they don't really mean it, but the radicals mean it.
Yeah, the best version of that was were the guys who would leave their parents' townhouse downtown and walk across the street to Zuccotti Park.
Occupy Wall Street, right?
And live in a tent for 6 hours and then walk back across the street to a brownstone. That was highly typical, not just of that movement, but every version of it.
Right.
Isn't that every version of it?
It is true of every revolutionary movement. That's part of the story of the book that Noah wrote about, which is that radical terrorists in the West tend to be disproportionately well-to-do and well-educated, and alienated for very complicated reasons from their own backgrounds or their own parents or whatever, that lead them to these extreme, violent efforts to destroy rather than rather than create. But Abe, I just want to leave you with this. Like, you say that, you need to have a vision that competes with the El Sayed vision. And I'm wondering, I have no answer to this, whether that's true. In fact, that what we're talking about here is this election is going to be decided by people in the middle, right? The Republicans are going to vote for John James. Maybe a bunch of Democrats are going to stay home or vote for John James rather than vote for El Sayed. Certainly, I think you could Mike Rogers. Certainly, I think you can expect that a significant number of Jews who vote Democratic will not vote for El Sayed, just as they didn't vote for Mamdani. It's a much smaller number in Michigan, and not enough to sort of change the balance of things unless the election were incredibly close. But do these less committed voters, do these less involved voters, do they need a vision, or do you go, what is this craziness? This is all craziness. He likes Hamas. He wants Medicare. He wants socialized medicine. He talks about overthrowing capitalism, though he says he's a capitalist. What is this? This isn't us. He's Meshuggah.
You need that in the mix for sure.
Okay.
But if that's all, then you got a problem. I think you've got to have a compelling positive agenda.
Well,
by positive, I mean, what are you going to do? What are you going to give them? I mean, that's the other thing. Like, past 15 years of elections are always about vowing to give people sort of material things or understandable, non-abstract things. You got to come up with something.
I don't know. I mean, maybe just saying this is the 250th anniversary of the United States. I like the United States. I'm proud to be an American. I am grateful that my forefathers somehow got here, and that our forefathers built this nation based on these principles. And this guy doesn't like America, and I'm here to stand up for you as an American, and he's looking to stand up for some people who like to slaughter children in tunnels after kidnapping and torturing them.
But
is that a vision? I think that's a vision. It's not a.
I don't think so. I really don't. And I think, but there's another problem here, which is that we're at this, phase, sort of population wide, where people resent being told what to think of someone else. I don't want to hear your assessment of this person. I'll make up my mind. I don't trust you. And so people don't want to be told what to think, told how to assess. And so you can't lean to it. Even if it's all true, you can't lean too heavily into it.
Okay. Well, anyway, this is all interesting as a prediction game, and we'll see what happens. Remember that even though we're in a world in which obviously all the trade winds are blowing in favor of the Democrats, the polling does suggest that as this head-to-head campaign begins, that Rogers is slightly favored. So the atmosphere.
I wish I thought I agreed with that.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, polling says that Rogers is up over El Sayed. That's just.
Except El Sayed's poll says that he's up 97 points.
Right, exactly.
Last I checked,
that Mike Rogers pollster is quitting because there's no path to victory.
Right.
Last I checked, actually, RCP had it tied between Rogers. Now Rogers has a 0.3% advantage in the RCP average. So
well, and by the way,
take what comfort you can from
that.
that.
No, but part of the problem here, then, and let's just make this point, and then we could start. The polling firms in Michigan that polled the Democratic race are completely discredited because they oversampled the left and they got the race wrong by 13 points on average.
Importantly, they oversampled the people who vote for DSA. degree holders, affluent,
Yes.
educated people, as opposed
Right.
to the people that are hard to poll, which are working class minority voters.
Yeah, I don't know why they're so hard to. Why are they? Why would they be hard to poll? I don't even
They're
believe they're hard to
they're
poll.
working.
They have
busy.
cell phones. Everybody has a cell phone. Everybody has
Do
a
you
computer.
answer cell phone pollsters?
I get those. I
used to,
get.
do not.
Hey, you know how many texts a day? I'm sure everybody in this podcast.
Yeah, I know,
does.
but you're
I answer
but
0% of them.
you do, but that doesn't mean that like that. Anyway, you're
Who are the people
part
who
of
want to
the-
take polls? Yeah, right. You're agitated. You're probably an
Anyway,
educated left-wing DSA.
I seriously believe that this polling error was deliberate and that it was that these were push polls. You can't have polls this extreme with that kind of margin that aren't there to depress the Stevens turnout and to make it look as though this is a boulder rolling down a steamroller that you cannot stop, because it's just incredibly easy to gin these up by doing exactly what you're talking about, which is oversampling the people that are going to vote for El Sayed, or oversampling them, and then if you try to then use formula to recreate more precisely what the electorate is going to be like, applying a screen so that this 13-point margin, which seems incredibly unrealistic, isn't a 13-point margin. But they didn't do that, and they all heard it, and they all did the same thing, and so maybe the polls have it the Stevens up by 0.3, but what we know is that the polls have been over-representing the El Sayed vote in Michigan for 6 months. So why aren't they over-representing it now?
I mean, if that's true, why would it be limited to Michigan? The phenomena could be
Only because
across the board.
It could be, but in this case, there was a very specific race that was being polled. It was a 3-person race.
Michigan had trouble. Michigan was not as polly, you know, to say it as and so what El Sayed was able to do was take his own polls and flood the system, and they made up a larger percentage, and that caused what John calls the herding, because if the last 3 polls all had him up by double digits, then the other pollsters everybody just kind of shifted along that line that he was just able to. But it is a national thing, right? I mean, we had those polls in the presidential election that suggested at times that Trump, had basically no path to victory. We had the polls showing Kamala Harris, she was polling reasonably well, and far better than she performed right throughout the process. So the question of the level of like how badly you miss is really the question, I guess.
There is now, it would appear, a 3%, a sort of standard 3% poll error that needs to be taken account of, where Democrats are simply oversampled in polling, and either the firms do something to take that into account and adjust their screens and their numbers accordingly, or they don't. And that's why Ann Seltzer was run out of business, supposedly the gold standard pollster of all time. And she, of course, had Harris winning Iowa by 12 or something. I can't even remember. And Trump won it. And that was the end of her career. That was the end of her career. So, there is some kind of weird inability to properly poll electorates in the United States. And so right now, El Sayed is the person who benefited from the wrong polling, in the sense that, it made him look like he was a winner. And I'm just saying, if the poll numbers right now look like it's a tight race, you might want to immediately think, Rogers is probably up by 2 or 3, because whatever they're doing, they're still not going to just design the electorate properly. Okay. This has been a very long podcast, and we didn't even have anything to talk about. So let's see if people get here all the way to the end. If you did, congratulations to you. Noah Rothman, everybody read Noah's book, Blood and Progress. Still available. Jim Meggs wrote a wonderful piece in the Wall Street Journal's Free Expression vertical today, largely taking the measure of Blood and Progress. And so this is the day to go get your copy. And great to see you, as always. And for Seth and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.